Imagine believing something with absolute certainty, only for it to be proven devastatingly false. In CSS Breakdown, book by book, season 07, episode 08, we pull back the curtain on the complex world of memory, drawing from Atkinson Hilgard's Introduction to Psychology 15th edition to understand why our minds don't always record the truth. And to really bring this home, let's start with a case that, while it really shook the justice system, Ronald Cotton and Jennifer Thompson. Back in 1986, Ronald Cotton was on trial for raping Jennifer Thompson. In Jennifer's testimony, he was incredibly confident. She described how she intently studied the rapist's face during the attack, searching for any detail, hairlines, scars, tattoos, anything. She later wrote, and this is powerful, "I knew this was the man. I was completely confident. I was sure. I wanted him to die." Her certainty led to his conviction, life plus 54 years, even though he had a solid alibi.
It's a really harrowing story. And what happened next is, frankly, shocking. 11 years down the line, DNA evidence comes out. It completely exonerated Ronald Cotton. And the actual rapist, another man, Bobby Poole. When Jennifer was shown Poole's picture, her reaction was just as certain as before. She said, "I have never seen this man in my life. I have no idea who he is." But she was tragically wrong. And this isn't just a one-off tragedy. The Innocence Project, looking at DNA exonerations, found something staggering. 84%. 84% of those wrongful convictions involved mistaken eyewitness identification. That just sets the stage perfectly for what we're exploring today.
Yeah, that number is just chilling. It really underscores why we need to dig into this. So our mission today is to unpack how memory works, the basics, but also where it goes wrong, why our minds aren't perfect recorders, and the sometimes devastating results, like in the Cotton case. Okay, so let's get into it. Before we really tackle why memory can be so unreliable, let's just lay out the basic map. Psychologists talk about memory in specific ways, right? What are the core ideas from the source material?
Exactly. It's not just one big thing. Think of it in layers. First, there are the three stages: encoding, storage, and retrieval. Encoding is like getting the information in, translating it into a memory code, like hearing a name Barbara Cohn for the first time. Storage is holding on to it. Retrieval is pulling it back out later when you need it. And crucially, things can go wrong at any of those points. It's also pretty interesting. Brain scans show encoding tends to activate the left side of the brain more, while retrieval gets the right side going.
Okay, encoding, storage, retrieval, failure points at each stage. Got it. What's the next big distinction?
The next is the idea of three different memory stores. This comes from the Atkinson model, a classic framework. It starts with the sensory store. Huge capacity, but incredibly brief. Like visual information, iconic memory, lasts maybe tenths of a second. Think of seeing a lightning flash. Auditory info or echoic memory hangs around a bit longer, maybe a few seconds. It's the raw data dump, basically.
So, super fleeting first impressions. Then what?
Then it hits short-term memory, though we often call it working memory now. This is your conscious awareness, what you're actively thinking about, but it decays fast, maybe 20 seconds, unless you actively rehearse it. Like repeating a phone number to yourself.
Right. Keep it active or lose it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's the gateway to the long-term store. This is the big one. Theoretically, unlimited capacity. Holding stuff for minutes, hours, years, a lifetime. Information gets pulled back from long-term into working memory when you need to use it.
Okay, sensory, short-term, or working, and long-term stores. Makes sense. Is there a third distinction?
Yes. The final one is about different kinds of memory for different information. We have explicit memory, that's your conscious recall of facts and events. Like remembering what you had for lunch yesterday or who the first president was, you deliberately access it. Then there's implicit memory. This is unconscious. Think skills, habits, knowing how to ride a bike. You don't consciously recall the steps, you just do it.
Explicit you declare, implicit you demonstrate. Okay. So this multi-layered system already feels complex. And going back to that very first sensory store, how on earth do researchers even measure something that disappears almost instantly?
That's where some really clever experiments come in, particularly George Sperling's work back in the 60s. He started with what's called the span of apprehension. He'd flash a grid of, say, 12 letters for just 50 milliseconds, incredibly fast. People could usually only report back about 4 or 5 letters.
Okay, seems limited.
Right. But people felt like they'd seen more. So Sperling tried something different, the partial report procedure. He'd flash the grid, then immediately play a high, medium, or low tone. The tone told participants which row, top, middle, or bottom, they should report. And get this, they could report almost all the letters from the cued row.
Whoa, so the information was there, just fading too fast to report it all.
Exactly. Showed that their sensory memory actually held much more, maybe 9 of the 12 letters, but it vanished before they could spit it all out. By varying the delay of the tone, he figured out this iconic memory fades in about a third of a second, 300 milliseconds. Gone.
And then there's something called visible persistence. This is that lingering visual image you're briefly conscious of. DeLallo did a cool experiment. He flashed dots in 2 quick frames. Together, they made a square grid with 1 dot missing. People could only spot the missing dot if the gap between frames was super short, like under 150 milliseconds. It shows that conscious visual trace also fades incredibly fast.
Okay, so we perceive way more than we can consciously process or report immediately. How does this connect to, say, just noticing things around us? Is there a theory that ties this sensory response to actual awareness? Yeah, the Busian-Loftus theory tries to bridge that gap. It suggests that a visual stimulus triggers this sensory response in your brain. The total amount of information you get from it depends on the overall strength of that response over time. But your conscious visibility of it, what you actually notice, that relates to the rate at which you're acquiring information. Think about driving and suddenly realizing you haven't seen the last few miles of scenery.
Zoning out.
Right. Your eyes were open, the sensory response is probably happening, but you weren't actively acquiring or processing it at a rate that made it consciously visible. Which leads us to the big question. If all this initial input is so fleeting, how do we actually hold on to thoughts? And that leads us straight into working memory. It's the next stage, that mental workspace or scratchpad we talked about. It's where you do your active thinking. Now, encoding into working memory, attention is everything. Seriously, so many things we think of as memory problems are really just attention failures.
Like forgetting why you walked into a room.
Exactly. Or not being able to remember the eye color of the person you just talked to at the checkout. You didn't forget it. You never paid attention to it in the first place. It never got encoded. There's that famous Doonesbury cartoon about it.
Yeah. So attention is the gatekeeper. Once something gets past the gate, how is it coded?
We use different codes. Phonological coding sound-based is really common, especially for words or numbers. Repeating that phone number, that's phonological rehearsal. Conrad's classic experiment showed this. People recalling letters made mistakes based on sound, like confusing B and T, not B and R. They were hearing it in their heads. We also use visual coding, like trying to mentally arrange furniture in a room or figure out how luggage fits in a car trunk. You're manipulating a visual image. Some people, mostly kids, have eidetic imagery, that photographic memory idea. But it's rare, fades quickly, and isn't truly photographic because our eyes only see sharp detail in a tiny central spot, the fovea.
Okay, so sound and visual codes. How is working memory structured now? You said the idea has evolved.
Right. Alan Baddeley's model is really influential. He proposed that working memory isn't just one thing, but has multiple components. There's the phonological loop handling the sound-based stuff like subvocal rehearsal, and the visual spatial sketchpad handling the visual and spatial information like doing mental rotation tasks.
Like separate little workspaces.
Pretty much. And there's evidence for it. Brain injury patients might have damage to one loop but not the other. PE scans showed different brain areas light up too, typically left hemisphere for verbal, right, for spatial. Overseeing all this is the central executive. It's like the boss, directing attention, coordinating the loops. And there's also an episodic buffer that helps bind different pieces of information together, like linking a person's name to their face into one episode.
Okay, complex system. What about storing things in working memory? Is there a limit?
Oh, yes. A very famous limit. George Miller called it the magic number 7 plus or minus 2. Most people can hold about 5 to 9 distinct items or chunks in working memory at once.
7 items seems small.
It is. But here's the trick. Chunking. We can increase the amount of information held, not by increasing the number of slots, but by making each chunk bigger and more meaningful. Like remembering the letters SINCERELYYOURS is hard, but chunk it into sincerely yours. Easy. 2 chunks. Or dates like 1066, 1492, 1918, 3 chunks, not 12 digits.
So you group things based on what you already know in long-term memory. Clever.
What about forgetting from working memory?
2 main culprits. Decay, where the memory trace just fades over time, maybe 15, 20 seconds if you don't rehearse. And displacement, where new information coming in essentially bumps out the old stuff, especially once you hit that 7-item limit.
Makes sense. And retrieving info from working memory, is that instant?
Counterintuitively, no. The more items you're holding, the slightly longer it takes to find one. Sternberg's experiments showed this. He'd give people a short list of numbers, then show a probe number. They had to say if the probe was in the list. Reaction time went up by about 40 milliseconds for each extra item in the list. So even in that tiny active workspace, there's some kind of search or scanning process happening.
Seems like it. It suggests your brain quickly checks through the items you're actively juggling.
Okay, so this working memory, our mental scratch pad, it's crucial for, well, pretty much everything we do consciously.
Absolutely. Think about mental arithmetic like 35 times 8. You need working memory to hold the numbers, the steps, the intermediate results. Solving analogies, reasoning problems all rely heavily on it. And language. Following a conversation, understanding a sentence, reading comprehension, you're constantly holding information in mind and relating it to what came before and what's coming next. People with larger working memory capacity tend to be better readers.
And it's the bridge to long-term memory, right? How does stuff get from this temporary holding area into permanent storage?
Exactly, it's like a way station. But just keeping something in working memory, that's maintenance rehearsal, just repeating it, often isn't enough for long-term storage. You need elaborative rehearsal. That means thinking about the meaning, connecting it to things you already know, organizing it. That's what helps transfer it to the long-term store.
Okay, so deeper processing helps it stick.
Right. We see this clearly in free recall experiments. People remember the last few items on a list. Well, that's the recency effect. They're still fresh in working memory. But they also remember the first few items. Well, the primacy effect. Why? Because those early items got more rehearsal, more chance for that elaborative processing, and transferred to long-term memory. Rundas showed people actually rehearse early items more.
That makes sense. And you mentioned different brain areas earlier.
Yes, there's strong evidence for a division of brain labor. Working memory tasks heavily involve the frontal cortex. Long-term memory formation and retrieval relies critically on the hippocampus and related structures in the medial temporal lobe. We see this starkly in amnesia patients. Someone with damage to the hippocampus might have perfectly normal working memory. They can chat, follow instructions, but be unable to form new long-term memories. It really separates the systems.
All right, this leads us perfectly into the big archive. Long-term memory, this is where our lives are stored, right? Our knowledge, experiences. But as we're finding out, it's not like a perfect video library either. This is where things get really interesting and maybe a bit unsettling.
You nailed it. Long-term memory is vast, but it's definitely not a flawless recording. When it comes to encoding things like stories or conversations, the main code isn't sound or image, it's meaning. The gist. Think about John Dean's Watergate testimony. His recall for exact conversations was often wrong, but his memory for the overall meaning, the implications, was remarkably accurate. We prioritize the essence. That said, other codes exist too. You can remember the sound of someone's voice or a strong visual impression, but meaning dominates for verbal stuff.
And how do we make sure that meaning gets encoded effectively?
Elaboration.
Yeah.
Connecting new information to what you already know, adding meaningful links. The more you elaborate, the better the recall. For example, just reading Mozart went to Paris isn't as memorable as thinking why he went, maybe to find fame, escape a patron, whatever. Those connections create more pathways to retrieve the memory later. Basically, the better you understand something, the better you remember it.
So understanding equals remembering. What about when we forget things from long-term memory? Is the information actually gone?
Often, it's not gone, it's a retrieval failure. The information is still in there somewhere, but you can't access it. Like a book lost in a massive library without a proper catalog entry.
The classic tip of the tongue feeling.
Exactly. You know it, you might even know the first letter, but you can't pull it out. This is why retrieval cues are so helpful. If I give you a list of words to remember and later give you category names like animals or fruit as cues, you'll recall much more than without the cues. It's also why recognition tests, like multiple choice, are usually easier than recall tests, like essays. The options themselves provide powerful retrieval cues.
Okay, so cues help us find the lost books. What actively blocks retrieval? What makes it harder?
A major culprit is interference. When different memories get linked to the same cue, they can clash. There's retroactive interference. New learning messes up recall of old stuff.
Like learning a new phone number makes you forget the old one.
Precisely. And then there's proactive interference. Old learning messes up recall of new stuff, like automatically driving to your old parking spot even though you have a new one. The more things attached to one cue, the weaker that cue becomes for any specific item.
Interference. Makes sense. But is information ever truly lost? Erased?
Yes, it seems some information can be lost from storage, not just hard to retrieve. One line of evidence comes from things like electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, used for depression. ECT can disrupt recently formed memories, suggesting it interferes with the consolidation process, the biological changes that stabilize a memory trace over time. This consolidation involves the hippocampus and seems to take weeks. Monkey studies show removing the hippocampus impairs memories learned recently, but not older, well-consolidated ones. It suggests the hippocampus helps stabilize memories before they're more permanently stored elsewhere in the cortex.
So memories are fragile for a while after they form. Interesting. What about how encoding and retrieval interact?
They interact strongly. Organization and encoding dramatically helps retrieval. If you organize material, maybe hierarchically, you create a structure that guides your recall later. And context is huge. Being in the same environment where you learn something helps you remember it. The physical place acts as a cue. Think about going back to your old school.
Right. Smells and sights triggering memories.
Exactly. And it's not just external context. Your internal state matters too. Your mood, even physiological state. Studies show memory is better if your state at retrieval matches your state during encoding. State-dependent learning.
Fascinating. What about emotions? They seem to make memories really stick, sometimes too well.
Oh, absolutely. Emotional factors are powerful. For one, we tend to rehearse emotional events. More we think about them, talk about them, that strengthens the memory. This can lead to flashbulb memories. Those incredibly vivid, detailed memories from major public events like 9/11 or the Challenger explosion. You feel like you remember exactly where you were, what you were doing.
They feel totally accurate, like a photo.
They feel that way. But research shows even these are susceptible to decay and distortion over time. They're not perfect recordings, even though they feel like it. Confidence isn't always accuracy. High anxiety can also mess with retrieval. Not directly blocking the memory, but by flooding your mind with worried thoughts that interfere with the search process, like exam panic.
Yeah, your mind goes blank because you're too busy worrying.
Exactly. And as we mentioned, context effects apply to emotion too. If your mood at retrieval matches your mood at encoding, recall is often better. Think about reading your old diary entries. And then there's repression. Freud's idea that we unconsciously block traumatic memories. It's a very controversial area, hard to study ethically, but it's part of the discussion on emotion and forgetting.
Okay, so adding it all up, memory is complex, involves stages, stores, types, encoding, retrieval, and it's clearly not perfect. What's the really big takeaway here, the most crucial insight?
I think the most profound and maybe unsettling idea is that memory is fundamentally constructive and reconstructive. It's not like playing back a video, it's more like building something. And every time you remember it, you might rebuild it slightly differently.
Actively built, not passively recorded.
Precisely. It systematically departs from reality, both when we first experience something and later when we recall it. This is absolutely key to understanding cases like Jennifer Thompson's. Think about Jean Piaget, the famous psychologist. He had this incredibly vivid memory from childhood of being nearly kidnapped. He remembered the struggle, his nurse fighting off the attacker, the scratches, everything.
Wow.
He believed it completely until he was 15. Then, the former nurse confessed she'd made the whole story up. He realized he must have heard the story and later constructed it into a visual memory, projecting it into his past. His own conclusion. Some of what we firmly believe is probably fiction.
That's incredible. So this construction happens right from the start, during encoding.
Yes. Our perception itself isn't pure. It's influenced by top-down factors. Our knowledge, expectations, biases. This is constructive perception. There's an anecdote about someone seeing detailed figures and random paint splatters on a music box because they expected to see something. Or the phenomenon of perceptual interference. If you see a blurry picture and form a wrong idea about it, that wrong idea can stick even when the picture becomes clear, making it harder to see what's actually there.
So our expectations shape what we even perceive in the first place.
Right. And we also automatically generate inferences when we encode information. We fill in gaps, make assumptions based on context. These inferences then become part of the memory itself. Like in a story where someone mixes chemicals, readers might later remember the person intended to poison someone, even if the story never said that. The inference gets woven into the memory fabric.
Okay, so distortions can happen right away. What about later when we remember things?
That's post-event memory reconstruction. Every time you retrieve a memory, it's potentially open to change. You might subtly reshape it to fit new information, smooth out inconsistencies, or incorporate those inferences we talked about. Internally generated inferences often come from our schema's mental frameworks about how things work. Like a restaurant schema tells you what typically happens when you go out to eat, or social schemas, stereotypes. There's a story of a British psychologist who misremembered a student as looking like a perfect Viking because the student was Scandinavian, fitting his stereotype, even though the student looked nothing like it later. The schema distorted his memory.
Wow. Our own mental shortcuts can lead us astray. What about information from the outside influencing our memories after the fact?
That's a huge factor. External provided suggestions can dramatically alter memory. This is where Elizabeth Loftus's groundbreaking work comes in. Her classic study involved showing people a film of a car accident, asking how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other, led to higher speed estimates than asking how fast they were when they hit.
Just changing one word made a difference.
Yes. And more importantly, a week later, the smashed group was significantly more likely to falsely remember seeing broken glass, which wasn't in the film at all. The word smashed implanted a detail. Lab studies have gone even further, implanting entirely fictional events. Researchers have convinced people they remember being lost in a shopping mall as a child or spilling a punch bowl at a wedding event that never happened. Subjects even start adding their own details to these false memories.
That's deeply unsettling, that memories can be planted like that.
It is. And some people seem more susceptible those who score higher on scales, measuring dissociation or creative imagination. Now let's bring this back to Jennifer Thompson. We can see how these constructive processes likely plague out. First, poor initial encoding due to trauma, darkness, fear. Maybe not a clear image formed. Second, potential unintentional suggestion during the police procedures, mug shots lineup. Third, the lineup itself. Cotton was the only one she'd seen before in the mug shot, making him feel familiar, reinforcing the choice.
So familiarity felt like recognition.
Exactly. Once identified, Cotton's image likely became the basis for reconstruction. The hazy memory solidified around him, incorporating details perhaps suggested or inferred, leading to that incredibly high confidence. This reconstructed, confident memory then made her blind to the actual rapist, Bobby Poole. And crucially, she likely also constructed a memory of the process, believing she had carefully studied his face during the event, explaining her certainty about the identification process itself.
It paints a picture not of malice, but of how memory fundamentally works, or sometimes misworks. So these memory illusions, are they common? Are there other ways our memory plays tricks on us?
Oh, definitely. There are many known memory illusions. The DRM effect is a classic. You hear a list of related words like bed, rest, awake, tired, dream. Later, you're highly likely to falsely remember hearing the related word sleep, even though it wasn't on the list.
Your brain fills in the theme word.
Precisely. Or memory conjunction errors. If you study words like blackmail and jailbird, you might later falsely recognize a combination like jailmail. You mix up parts of real memories. Underlying many of these solutions is a failure in source monitoring. That's figuring out the origin of a memory. Did I actually see that or just imagine it? Did you tell me that or did I read it somewhere? When source monitoring fails, often due to relying on inference or familiarity, we misattribute the source, leading to these illusions. And this ability declines with age, making older adults more prone to, say, thinking they took their medicine when they only thought about taking it.
Okay, so memory is inherently constructive, prone to illusions, and source monitoring is key. This brings us back to the real-world implications. If memory is this fallible, especially under stress, how does this play out in, say, the legal system? You mentioned the confidence accuracy issue.
It's a huge problem. Juries naturally put a lot of weight on a confident eyewitness. But as we discussed, the science shows confidence is often a poor predictor of accuracy. Remember, maybe only half the studies show a strong link. You can have terrible encoding conditions, stress, poor view, leading to a weak initial memory. But later rehearsal, filling in gaps with assumptions or post-event info, can build a very confident but very inaccurate memory.
Just like Jennifer Thompson's case.
Exactly. Which is why some places, like New Jersey, now instruct juries to consider the conditions under which the memory was formed, not just the witness's certainty. And children are especially vulnerable to suggestive interviewing. Even well-meaning questions can implant false details or entire false events that kids then come to believe and report confidently. It gets even more concerning with forced confessions. Intense police interrogation techniques, especially presenting false evidence or using strong suggestion, can actually create false memories in suspects, leading them to genuinely believe they committed a crime they didn't. The Paul Ingram case, involving accusations of satanic abuse, is a chilling example of how someone can come to develop detailed, vivid, but entirely false memories under pressure.
That's profoundly disturbing. It really highlights the power of suggestion and the fragility of memory under duress. Okay, shifting gears slightly. For everyday life school, what can we actually do to make our memories work better based on these principles?
Thankfully, understanding how memory works gives us tools to improve it. First, leverage chunking for working memory, like that runner SF who chunked digits into running times. Find meaningful ways to group information. For encoding into long-term memory, use imagery. Mnemonic systems rely on this, the method of loci. Mentally place items you need to remember in familiar locations along a mental walk. To recall, you just walk through and see the items. Or the keyword method for languages. Link a foreign word to an English word that sounds similar, then create a vivid image connecting that sound-alike word to the meaning. Like caballo, horse, sounds like eye. Imagine a horse kicking a giant eye. Sounds weird, but it works.
Okay, imagery helps create strong links. What else?
Elaboration. Don't just passively receive information. Actively process its meaning. Ask questions. Connect it to your existing knowledge. Why is this important? How does it relate to X? This creates richer, more interconnected memory traces. Utilize context. If you're trying to recall something, try to mentally reinstate the context in which you learned it. Think about where you were, what you were doing, how you felt. Those context details act as retrieval cues. Organization is key. Organize material logically, especially hierarchically if possible. Outlines, mind maps, tree diagrams. And making your own organization is often most effective. And finally, maybe the most powerful technique. Practice retrieval. Don't just reread your notes. Actively test yourself. Try to recall the information from scratch. This self-testing or retrieval practice is far more effective for long-term retention than simply rereading. Even mental practice helps for skills.
Practice retrieval, not just rereading. That's a great takeaway. Okay, finally, let's tackle that contentious issue head-on, repressed memories. This really brings together everything: trauma, suggestion, reconstruction. What are the opposing views here based on the source material?
It's a really complex debate. On one side, you have researchers like Kathy Pesdek. She argues that while suggestion effects are real, lab studies often implant plausible false memories, like being lost in a mall. She questions whether highly implausible memories like bizarre ritual abuse can be so easily planted. Pesdek also points out the seeming inconsistency. We readily accept psychogenic amnesia for traumas like combat, where memory access is impaired, but doubt it specifically for sexual abuse. She argues the cognitive mechanisms might be similar.
Okay, so skepticism about implanting truly bizarre events and a question about consistency across trauma types. What's the counter-argument?
On the other side, Elizabeth Loftus highlights real-world cases like Nadine Kuhl, who developed incredibly detailed, bizarre, false memories of satanic cults and eating babies through suggested therapy. Loftus emphasizes the power of the misinformation effect to distort memories and points to lab studies that have successfully implanted rich, detailed false memories of events that never happened. She cites others, like McNally, who argue there's little empirical support for the idea that the mind actively represses trauma as a protective mechanism. Loftus's conclusion is stark. Without independent corroboration, it's extremely difficult, maybe impossible, to reliably distinguish a genuinely recovered memory of trauma from a memory that has been suggestively implanted or constructed over time.
A difficult debate with profound implications. So wrapping this all up, this deep dive really shows that our memories aren't like video recordings at all. They're active, dynamic, constantly evolving stories we tell ourselves.
Exactly. And Jennifer Thompson's story, as tragic as it is such a powerful illustration of that constructive nature. It's not about her being weak or lying. It's about the fundamental way human memory operates, its vulnerabilities included.
So, the next time you recall a vivid detail from your own past or hear someone else recount an event with absolute certainty, maybe pause and consider these invisible forces of reconstruction. How might knowing this, understanding the architecture of memory, change how you trust your own recollections or how you interpret the memories of others?